There are two things needed in the development of personality: a sense of beauty and the preservation of sincerity. Inayat Khan. Hello and welcome to Nameless. Evolution Begins Within, a magazine-style podcast bridging science, mysticism, and the human experience. Thank you for joining us. I'm Julie R. Rocco, and joining me is our co-host, Amin Dadi. On this episode, we ask the question, what is personality? But more specifically, what is the art of personality? We'll start in the science section by describing the many qualities of the ego, then go on to the big 5 personality traits, and finally, the latest in science that states there are only 4 personality types. We'll use these as a starting point for the conversation of what it means to become a real human being. Then we catch up with Alice, who tells us what happens when her doing doesn't fit into any of the boxes our current society deems worthwhile. She shares a personal story about being accosted with the harsh question, "What do you do?" in the latest installment of If Not Now, When? Conversations with Alice Wyatt. And now, here's our co-host, Amin Dadi.
Thanks, Julie. Also in this episode, the Innernaut enters a meditation dream to reveal an aspect of the essence hidden in our time and space manifestation. He reports that besides our storyline, the overallness of the heart is in relation with the essence behind all that is, which means that if you relate with the heart, you relate with the essence, because the essence and the heart work hand in hand. The heart is the overallness. And from our touchstone, the mystic Inayat Khan, Julie and I will discuss a broader view of how to make the transition from the individual we were born as into a human being by shaping ourselves through the art of personality.
Before we begin, we invite you to take what intrigues you and leave the rest. Our faithful guide in life is our felt sense. When we ask ourselves, how does experiencing this information or situation feel? We easily find our answer. If it doesn't feel right, drop it, move on. It's not meant for you. The same goes for content on our episodes. Some concepts will resonate and feel good, sparking something on the inner planes, while other information may be confusing or not ring true. In those cases, simply leave it behind. We are in a world of the great unknown, where the human eye perceives less than 1% of all available light. So we ask you, how much can really be known when we cannot see 99% of what's in front of us? That's why we believe the key to life is asking the question, how does this feel in my heart? And now it's time for science and definitions. So, personality refers to individual differences and characteristics of thinking, feeling, and behaving. The study of personality focuses on 2 broad areas. One is understanding the individual differences in a particular personality characteristics, such as sociability or irritability. The other is understanding how these various parts of a person come together as a whole.
Let's see what Eckhart Tolle has to say about all this. He describes the ego with 2 qualities. The egoic mind is completely conditioned by the past. Its conditioning is twofold. It consists of content and structure. The content we identify with is conditioned by our environments, upbringing, and surrounding culture. The reason why such acute suffering occurs is concealed in the word my. And it is structural. The unconscious compulsion to enhance one's identity through association with an object is built into the very structure of the egoic mind. In our research on the ego, we found Wedding of Body and Soul, a book by Richard Shellquist. He's a devotee and a longtime student of the teachings of Inayat Khan, the Indian mystic and master musician. Here's what he has to say. Another reason to keep the pesky ego under control and fully accept whatever has already happened is that the ego's unpleasant dramas, reactive episodes, and rambling chatter will cause the body's stress response to dump toxic quantities of stress hormones into the bloodstream, even though there is no external, life-threatening situation.
Stress hormones are designed to shut down a wide variety of the body's system in order to focus all energy on a suitable response to a sudden emergency. However, with repeated long-term exposure to stress, the toxic brew of stress hormones can impair, damage, or even destroy a wide variety of bodily systems: the immune system, the reproductive system, tissue repair, hormonal balance, and brain chemistry. These result in a wide variety of effects, such as predisposition to illness, arteriosclerosis, diabetes, memory loss, and even a profound inability to experience the pleasure or joy of life.
In the unhealthy ego, the undisciplined chatter and incessant rambling keep the mind so preoccupied with self-centered noise that the still small voice of divine presence cannot even be heard. Therein lies the problem. We need to find a way to harmonize the ego with the gifts of divine presence. We need the ego, but we don't need to be dominated by its drama and chatter.
There's an article that I found from Whitney Norris. It's called Some Thoughts on Thoughts. And it's about the inner critic and self-talk. I'll just quote her here. Self-talk is among the 5 most visited topics in therapy. She talks about how there's many different views of the origins of the self-talk. And one is that, it's what our parents said to us. It's how we were spoken to. That creates the inner dialogue. Imagine being a child and told, you're stupid, you're dumb, as opposed to, you're beautiful and magnificent and brilliant.
When you encourage a child to say, even though it's certainly not a perfect drawing, you could say it's good, but you can do better.
Right.
To encourage that thought that, yes, not to tell them that it's great because it's not great. Don't lie to them about it. They're not a Picasso yet. But they have the potential.
Right.
What you're doing is good.
Right.
You can do better.
We can all do better. There's always more to learn, always more to grow. So that leads us to New York Times bestselling author Dr. Shefali Tasbari, who explains in her book, The Awakened Family, another way to look at the self-centered ego versus the divine barometer we are all embodied with. So I took what she had and I changed it a little bit because I can't read what she wrote in the book because that would be copyright infringement. So I put my zhuzh on it, but it's basically the essence of what she had to say. It's only human to want to assert our perceived power, although when we are coming from a deeper, sincere self, to feel empowered is healthy. The other, the rambling chatter, is the self-centered ego. We've all been given inner guidance, a divine spark that is not swayed by the reactive ego and its constant judgments, past stories, and lies. When we pause and embody this inner guidance, we become more attuned to our own reactivity, changes in our breath patterns, and body sensations. We can begin to feel ourselves getting angry. So when we stop to pay attention to how we feel, with practice, we can all sense when we are out of alignment with a more evolved self. The work is to craft a deeper sense of awareness, create a space for a calmer self to enter by taking a beat, a breath, a moment, by asking for our needs to be met with deep respect for ourselves and others. We can change the cycle of the self-centered ego and its constant auditionings for one's attention. So today in the Western culture, psychologists often describe personality in very limited term as of 5 basic traits. So the big 5 traits are conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, openness to experience, and neuroticism. So let me just define what they say openness to experience is. Well, it's pretty simple. It means you're receptive to new ideas, new people. You likely to seek out a variety of experiences, become familiar with the unknown, and pay attention to your inner feelings. So that's what's considered openness to experience.
That sounds like you're alive.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. You know, people with low levels of openness prefer familiar routines, ideas, and they can be perceived as closed-minded. All right, so the next one is conscientiousness, which is a fundamental personality trait. It reflects the tendency to be responsible, organized, hardworking, goal-directed, and to adhere to norms and rules.
I think I missed that one.
Well, so it's interesting that they say goal-directed and adhere to norms and rules, which means you're conscientious. I guess I, as an artist, had to learn what all the rules were so I could break all the rules. You know, I think maybe that's part of it. You know, they're also saying that they're good at self-regulation and impulse control, and they can keep long-term goals. They make deliberate choices, have or behave cautiously, or, you know, not impulsively.
Yeah, I could have used some of that.
Growing up. Yeah. So here's the extroversion, which I find, to me, it should be extroversion, introversion. Extroversion is a personality trait characterized by outgoingness, high energy, and or talkativeness. In general, the term refers to being where someone recharges or draws energy from other people. Yeah. Wouldn't we call those vampires? Yeah, maybe. Depends, I guess.
Possible.
Yeah. So instead of drawing energy from being alone, which is introversion. Extroversion was first proposed by noted psychologist Carl Jung in the 1920s, and extroverts are thought to make up of anywhere of half to 3/4 of the American population. People who identify as extroverts tend to search out novel experiences and social connections that allow them to interact with other individuals as much as possible. Someone who is highly extroverted will feel bored or even anxious when they're made to spend too much time alone. That's what I wanted to talk about. That part right there.
Well, with COVID-19, et cetera. Okay.
Well, to me, it's been, couldn't ask, like the universe couldn't be saying more, y'all need to go interior. Like, it just keeps smacking us down with all these different variations, and now it's part of the vernacular and part of the conversation.
Well, I think it's something we'll go into later, but basically no one in school has ever taught us anything about what would be inner. In us, we're almost always outward taught history, geography, politics, whatever we're taught.
Right.
It's really
social conformity.
Nothing to do with how we feel, what those feelings come from, or anything about it. So it's been really tough.
Well, I think because the extrovert has been so glorified, specifically in the Western culture. I mean, it's like, are you fun? Are you playful? Are you, well, not everyone is, because not everyone had a good childhood. Not everyone grew up
in... Can't be a man without a firm handshake.
Right. Or in my world, a dyke without a firm handshake.
Crunch their wrist.
Oh my gosh. All right. So anyway, so this extroversion, introversion thing, we all know how important it is. Well, I mean, and I know how important it is, and hopefully a lot of our audience as well, how important it is to be alone in silence. We'll actually get to that in one of our other episodes, but back to the 5 characteristic traits. So the next one is agreeableness. So it's a trait that can be described as cooperative, polite, kind, and friendly. People high in agreeableness are more trusting, affectionate, altruistic, and generally display more pro-social behaviors than others. People high in this pro-social trait are particularly empathetic, showing great concern and welfare for others. So that's interesting. I guess as a kid, I was considered agreeable.
So if you wanted to be a con man, you would have to emulate those traits so people would trust you.
Totally.
And so, hello. So it's what we're talking about is, yes, this is a type of personality as it exists. But then, of course, because these cues are given, then it's open to basically corruption.
Right. So what they do say is when a person is high in this personality trait, they are less me-centric and more we-centric. They look for the common good in others and are quick to hear out opinions of other people around them and look for harmony instead of discord. So why this matters is because the next topic is neuroticism. I think all of us embody these traits.
That's my fallback position.
Is neuroticism.
When I can't convince myself that I'm okay.
Right. I'm okay right now. I'm okay right now. I'm okay right now. Right? All right. So neuroticism is typically defined as a tendency towards anger, self-consciousness, irritability, emotional instability, self-doubt, anxiety, depression, and other negative feelings. Oh my. This exists on a spectrum. Some people are just much more neurotic than others. In the context of the Big Five, neuroticism is sometimes described as low emotional stability or negative emotionality. Some self-deprecating comedians and complainers wear the neuroticism badge as a badge of honor. But in truth, people with neurotic dispositions are more prone to anxiety, mood disorders, and other unfavorable social and emotional outcomes.
Well, that really goes to speak to knowing your inner self, because you're basically exhibiting these characteristics because you're fearful, or you're depending on someone else's esteem of you. So your low self-esteem has to be filled with something, or something you don't want a traumatic experience you didn't want to confront. Now you're filling your life with neurotic activities, so it keeps you shallow. It keeps you away from the deep problem that you might have had.
Right. So I go back to what were you patterned as a child? What were you around as a child? What was the vibrational energy as a child? What were the daily rituals as a child that you were indoctrinated into that might be creating these characteristics that are unwanted? So here, let's go on. Persons with elevated levels of neuroticism respond poorly to environmental stress, interpret ordinary situations as threatening, and can experience minor frustrations as hopelessly overwhelming. Neuroticism is one of the more well-established, empirically validated personality traits with a sustainable amount of, there's a whole bunch of research. So this is also interesting. Neuroticism has an enormous public health implication. It provides a huge vulnerability for a wide array of different forms of psychopathology, including anxiety, mood, substance, and eating disorders. But yeah, neuroticism, this psychological mental illness, it can lead to, this is interesting. So neuroticism is comparably associated with a wide array of physical illnesses, such as cardiac problems, disrupted immune functioning, asthma, atypical eczema, irritable bowel syndrome, and even increased risk of mortality.
Wow, so there's really some
physical detriments.
Definite detriments that occur from a mystic's point of view. If you look at things through your mind sense, and not through your heart sense, that's where your deviation comes.
But in the West, nobody's ever taught to work from their heart sense. I mean, think about it.
I know. But, and you make a statement about the West, but the international commodification of everything is not subject just to the West. And in fact, it's taken over India and all the traditional places.
Right, but it's come from our sickness, our mental sickness in the Western culture.
But it's affecting the world.
Absolutely.
Did you ever read Lord of the Flies? Okay,
oh, yeah.
so the point is made about public education and schooling is that it's for acculturation. It's for you to get to be in society with your peers, etc. But what they don't say is there's nobody in charge. So the bullies come out. The whole thing is a terrible place to put a child and say you're learning something. Well, you're learning something, all right, but it's actually learned trauma, one way or the other. Or shut up and sit down and listen to what I have to say, which is a whole shutdown of your own ability as a human being, a respected soul, to actually live on the planet. We need to emphasize our ability, our basic human curiosity and ability to trust ourselves. Early on, stuff you have to learn when you're 35. You've lived a number of years now, and you've been bouncing around like a monkey in a barrel, and you just don't. You're doing the things that are expected of you, and you're probably surviving somehow economically, except for those who are shattered by the whole experience and aren't a complete personality. They don't talk about the collateral damage that these boxes of personality that they put people in only apply to people who are functional in some bizarre way. They don't apply to the people who, because of being in this society, have just basically are too tender, haven't been taught what to filter in, what to leave out, so that's the tragedy of it all.
So this is a report from Northwestern University in Illinois on the 4 different personality types. Now, what they say those different types is reserved, role models, average, and self-centered. So average cluster is defined as people who are highly in neuroticism and extroversion, yet low in open-mindedness. Most people fall into this categories, with females having a stronger and more frequent presentation than their male counterparts. The reserved cluster is defined as people who are highly in agreeableness and conscientiousness, yet low in extroversion and neuroticism. The self-centered cluster is defined as people who are high in extroversion, yet below average in openness, agreeableness, or conscientiousness. The size of this population typically increases with age. So finally, the role model cluster is defined as those who are low in neuroticism and high in all other traits. So one of the things I wanted to point out was that people's personality types often change as they mature. Teenagers tend to be more self-centered, while older people tend to be more conscientious and agreeable. The implications of this new study can be of particular interest to the professionals, such as hiring managers and mental health care providers, who are looking to filter through potential candidates for specific traits. This study was actually able to be done because what they did is they gleaned a whole bunch of online resources as data points and were able to bring that together because now more people than ever are sharing that data. So what they did was this new approach was nothing like the Myers-Briggs system, which we've all, if you're over 50, you've taken the Myers-Briggs test. And all I remember taking these tests was the horrible questions, the language that was so poorly used, and they even talk about that basically this was developed in the 1940s by Carl Jung. They're so poorly written, and there's nothing behind them other than archetypes that were developed that Carl Jung kind of mushed together and made into different questions to fit into these archetypes. Basically, there's no science behind the Myers-Briggs, is what I'm trying to say. Well, that brings us to this article that I found from the American Psychological Association on how personalities are developed. What do we come with and what is built in? What this writer goes into talking about is she proposes that our personality developed around basic needs. And she says there are 3 basic needs: the need to predict our world, the need to build competence in our to act on the world, and because we're social beings, the need for acceptance from others. So imagine coming into this world in a poor family, fight or flight. You're not sure if there's going to be food. You're not sure if the electricity and the heat's going to be on, and you're a 6-year-old. Now, what kind of psychological damage because your basic needs to predict the world aren't there? Your basic needs for sustenance might not, you're in fight or flight, you're in trauma. So your whole existence is trauma. So you don't know any other vibrational energy to be in. So that becomes part of your personality traits, is that you become a neurotic person, anxiety-ridden, not of your own doing, but because of the situation that you were born into. I mean, epigenetics, we now know, plays a role in that.
well, not only epigenetics, but just take my parents who are, went through the Depression.
Right.
So their whole idea of what money is and how important it is and have a sustained income and therefore don't challenge anything, get along, go along, is all ingrained into their basic need of continuity, of predictability. And that's how we function. Partially through mirroring what's around us.
So if we go back to, so let's just look at a need to build competence to act on our world. So if you're the 6-year-old kid who's not sure where your next meal's coming from, and you're not sure, if there's going to be heat on, and you're not sure if your parents are even coming home that night, how can you be competent in yourself? I mean, how is there even time to develop an awareness of self when you're just literally fight or flight? I mean, you're the gazelle in the Serengeti running from the lion constantly.
Yeah, no,
breaks my heart, because you can't.
Well, who was it? Somebody said it's so much more cost effective to grow a healthy child than to try to repair a child.
Frederick Douglass.
Later on in their life, and it's so important, and yet. Is that where our society is? Is that where our deals are? No.
I just wanted to bring up these things, that the need to predict our world, the need to be competent and be able to act in our world, and, the need for social acceptance. If those aren't met at an early age, how do we begin to develop the personality? I mean, we have to unlearn the trauma. So that's where mysticism comes in. And what Inayat Khan has to say.
The mystical point of view is, we want to change the world. That's the common Western thought.
That's the ego.
But we want to change the world. But actually, all that needs to be altered is our point of view about the world, because it's from our assumption of how the world is that we project, react, and form what is, which is very hellish at the moment. If there is a hell anywhere, we're creating it seemingly right here, based on our inability to go within. So from the mystic Inayat Khan, we have a statement which I think is pertinent. A human being, to be human, is our greatest difficulty. We are born a human being, but the first thing we ought to be is what we are not. We are anything but a human being. We're willing to be a solicitor, a doctor, a professor, but to be a human being, that is the thing we think of last. And mostly, we don't think of it at all. So he says an individual being greater than an animal because one possesses wealth, or because one has read many books, or because one has learned much, does that make one greater as a human being? No, one is greater from an individual when he's become a person. Very few of us distinguish between individuality and personality. Individuality is that which we have brought with us with our birth. We are born as a separate entity that itself makes us an individuality. But personality is something that is acquired. It does not come with us. It is something we gain. And so he goes into 4 grades through which one can develop through the art of personality. The first grade is when a person becomes thoughtful and so begins to observe one's own thoughts, to see one's actions. The second is when one not only observes one's thoughts and actions, but one is able to control them. The third grade is when a spontaneous outflow of sympathy comes from that person. when it is natural that his attitude is outgoing, that one's personality attracts and becomes a blessing. The fourth grade is a grade where no effort has to be made by this artist to realize the art of personality. In this grade, the artist becomes art itself, and whatever one does, it becomes a beautiful picture. And so you can see that the qualities of heart run through the mystic's viewpoint of the world. And so from the mystic's point of view, the mind is a very great accomplice and helper of the heart. But if you lead with the mind, you end up slicing and dicing the parts of a human, and you never get to the point where we are relating to each other through heart, which is simultaneous with all that there is.
Right, sincerity.
And he points out that it's one of the battles that we have growing up is not to become jaded, not to become snarky, not to become cynical. How do we guard that sincerity? When you don't admit that, let's say you have a problem, and you go around it or ignore it, you're not being sincere. At that point, you've deviated, because the classical Oedipus story and all of that. Because they tried to avoid the fate, they brought the fate to them. It's a classic story of that regard. The fates told them what would happen, and instead of just sitting with it sincerely and just letting it be and grieve over it or whatever, they tried to do something. The mind told them they had to do something, and they set up this domino effect, which plays out in a most dramatic way. So our first benchmark is, how does it feel sincerely in our heart when you're, well, let's just say, someone has slandered you, somebody has done something that doesn't help you at all, that spread a rumor about you that is false, that really makes your life more difficult. Well, the first thing is to get really angry that they're doing this, but that's a reaction, right, not an action. It's not an art. In other words, an art is something where you make the brushstroke. You're not beholden to this other feeling. So what that means is that you're able, and under these when you become thoughtful, begin to observe your thoughts and actions, you also begin to see, therefore, other people's thoughts and actions. So you think, wow, that person must really feel inferior or in some way have no self-esteem, because they're elevating themselves because now I'm worse than them because they said something. It's a twisted logic that comes from those early traumas that we talked about before in the how we make our personalities. We need to honor. I think one of the first things that happened to me in this path that I was so happy about was I was the person my parents warned me about. Not to hang out with. But I had to own my own uniqueness, my own eccentricities, things that were not fitting the norm. They wanted a normal person to excel in the universe, become something, make money, do whatever it was that their norm was. And I felt really bad because I couldn't do that.
Right.
I wasn't interested in that.
Well, you were supposed to be a contractor, build houses, right?
Well, and they didn't matter as long as it was normal. And that wasn't
a writer.
It wasn't being a writer. Oh my goodness, no. But in fact, I declared at 21 I was going to become a journalist, and the big question came on my stepfather's face. Well, they don't make very much money. And if you could become a sports columnist, they make a lot of money. So you could see that his prejudice, his view, formed by his trauma, was now informing. He was looking at everything through that lens. Right. So the mystic says what you have to do is clean the mirror. You're looking at it through all this stuff. So
all your childhood traumas, all the stories that you've told,
all of that.
told yourself, all the things that other people have said about you, what your fourth grade teacher said, blah, 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 blah.
And you need to grieve it and let it go.
Right.
Not continue to react to it. So it can provide you with the brilliant, wonderful feeling of being one with the universe, of just being in the silence, being, not doing, not a human doing.
We're a human being.
Right?
Yeah.
So we hope that.
So that's that's being a natural human. I mean, the same reason I wanted to go sit out in the sun before we recorded this, because I needed to sit in the sun.
Yeah, it's so, people talk about spirituality as some kind of elevated thing. Actually, in Inayat Khan's soul, spirituality is being natural. And we become so unnatural in the way we concocted our civilization of our goods and services and high rises and
the commodification
cities.
Of the human being.
We've made this artificial world.
Right.
Not that it can't be beautiful. Some of the modern sculpture and architecture is fabulous. But do we see ourselves only in that? Is that it? Here we are. We're given all of the ability to create. And if you follow the Judeo-Christian model, that we were made in God's image. Even the one that they thought were separate were made in their image. Well, if that's the case, then we are, in fact, some part of us is absolutely can tap in to our creativity and come from our heart.
Well, we're all creators. I think part of the problem is we're told that, certain people are artists and other people are not. Like, if you can learn to write your name, you can learn to draw. It's just a visual perspective. It's a filter. It's a learning. I mean, I remember when I was in art school, not that I couldn't think I could draw, because I took art in high school. I knew I could draw, but I didn't have the right eyes. I couldn't see it properly because I wasn't taught perspective.
Interesting.
So when you're taught perspective and you look at things through a perspective view of drawing, holding your arm out because that thing's always going to be the same length, and getting your perspective and angles of things. It's another filter, another tool to get you closer.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, the design is, everything's design, packaging. Look at packaging. And artists have, once you've gotten the vocabulary that
it's
you
a
need,
language.
how to actually form what you want, so you're actually able to express what you feel, then the question comes, and it's so wonderful. It was the advice given by John Coltrane when a young man came to him and said, I want to become a musician. And he said, then you need to develop yourself. The music will come, but what are you going to say when you become a musician? And interestingly enough, his albums were based upon Hazrat Inayat Khan, the mystic, because he found in his mysticism of sound and music a way to deepen his appreciation of being human, which then came out
in the music.
His incredible art. And
right.
The book that someone might want to look into is something called The Art of Being and Becoming by Hazrat Inayat Khan. We use some of that in this talk. But Omid Safi, who's professor of religious studies, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, says Hazrat Inayat Khan's description of the shattering and healing power of love resonates in the hearts of emotionally experienced readers. So interesting. He's, Inayat Khan had 10 years of writing books from all of his compilations of his speeches. And yet people would come to him thinking that was somehow something. And he just couldn't believe that they didn't understand that they had to be, that it wasn't going to come from a book. They would have to go in self-introspection, thinking how they actually sincerely feel about their lives and really taking it down to zero and starting over, and which is what he had to do.
Right. Unlearn.
Unlearn. And then
finally, declutter.
And then get knowledge directly, not through somebody else's filter.
We keep looking outside for the answers that are within us. It just, what do yes, there's books, and I have tons of books on my shelves. Yeah, they're doorways. They're different filters, different ideas, different things to look at the world through. Doesn't mean it's true. It could be true for you at that moment, at that time. But I think as we all evolve, we find our own truth within ourselves as we develop our own art of personality, as we develop who we are in this world.
Yeah, it's important to note that you don't have to become a musician, artist, dancer, whatever. You have enough clay to work with in your own self. And the art of personality is exactly that. And then whatever you're able to do with your personality will come out in your art.
For sure.
You're an artist.
For sure.
It'll certainly come out in how you respect other people and what you exude as you walk around. It's really probably the most important aspect of being here on the planet, really.
Right.
And so, I would say be kind to yourself as you look at yourself. Look at yourself with very kind eyes. There's a saying, "I bless the shadows that brought me to the light." You don't reject anything. You don't deal harshly with anything. It's not a black and white world. It is so beautiful and multicolored that
millions plus.
Yeah.
As they would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
millions plus.
So if there's anything to take away from our episode on the art of personality is to observe your own reflection, if you can, of whatever the smallest thing is. And if you don't like it in your own environment, then change it to how you feel better. In fact, I'm going through that right now. I have a small room, and I have a lot of stuff. How much of it do I use every day? 1% of it? I mean, I just watch myself. I put these clothes on, I do that. There's a laundry basket. Okay, then what's all this other stuff? And so I decided that I'm just going to take all of that stuff, and there's a storage building where I live, and I'm just going to take everything out of the storage building, put it out on the street, and have anybody take whatever it is, and put the stuff I don't use, so that I can really just clean out the environment. So when I wake up in the morning, I am an empty space with just the things I like to see.
Well, I think of clutter on the outside is the similar clutter on the inside. I mean, if you keep shoving external things into your space and never clearing anything out, then you become a hoarder. Well, and what are you hoarding? What are you ingesting? I keep going back to what are you ingesting spiritually, emotionally, news, everything. You're bringing things, you're watching the evening news, you're bringing something into your personality, your personal reality. What are you watching before you go to bed at night? That's a super important question. Are you watching the evening news? It's probably not going to give you the best dreams.
Yeah, but wait till the next morning to watch the evening news. Anyway, so
or don't even watch the evening
or
news.
Don't.
Just skip it.
Yeah. Probably the most.
Once a week is enough.
Yeah, think about how it was in 1915 when you just had newspapers before radio.
Right.
And you just had newspapers. And so Inayat Khan came to America in 1910, so he was watching well-dressed, affluent people walking down the street, reading the newspaper like we do with our cell phones today.
Right.
Getting the latest whatever it is. And he said he couldn't believe it because he came from a very much slower culture. And a wealthy person would walk stately and slowly, wouldn't rush about anything at all. And he said there's people who are worth millions running for the train. What is that? And so we're doing it to ourselves. So why don't we do something better to ourselves?
Yeah. Slow down. Slow down. And here is If Not Now, When? Conversations with Alice Wyatt.
People ask the question, what do you do? Casually, not meaning harm. It is a very human thing to do. Humans love to categorize items in order to understand them. Still, what do you do is tricky because it assumes by doing, having an appropriate label, one is validated or has a purpose. Woe to those of us who are not doing or have obscure labels. For instance, I was a stay-at-home mom for many years and heard this question more times than I care to remember. People have recently become more politically correct, and the question has morphed into, do you work outside the home? When I told them what I did, they would murmur phrases like, 5 children? Oh my, you do work hard. Homeschool? I could never do that. And I would feel this little surge of satisfaction and confidence. Yeah, I had a category. Recently, I had realized just how much I had come to depend on mother and homeschooling parent labels for societal approval. In casual conversation, 2 very accomplished women about my age popped the dreaded question, what do you do? I am ready. I am retired, I answer. This feels very clever, and I have already used it successfully several times. People slip me into a recognized category, don't press me with questions about the murky details of my so-called retirement at such a young age. I continue my little speech. I raised 5 children and homeschooled for many years. There it was, the pinnacle of my career. But my children are now grown, so I am retired. I give a little laugh, in recognition of the audacity of having decided to retire from motherhood. These 2 women look at me blankly, and one repeats a form of the question with a tone of disbelief. But what do you do all day? In an instant, I realize these women are not interested in me, my likes, gifts, or even my charming personality. They are looking for a category to put me in, and the label sloth, slacker, probably not too bright, is about to be printed and slapped right on my chest. I pull myself together and stammer, well, I go to the pool when I'm not doing home improvement projects, and I'm interested in some local college classes. As they walk away, I feel empty inside. How does one's confidence in one's worth become eviscerated by 2 well-meaning strangers who ask a very typical question, what do you do? I realize I had clung to a label society had dubbed worthy motherhood as a sense of identity because, for some reason, just being me wasn't enough. I have come a long ways since that day. I am just me, most days, and feel quite happy about that. I embrace the truth that every human is a created being worthy of value because we are. Our value comes from our very existence. To look upon another human being is to look upon the face of the Creator, a Creator who embodies all that is good and true and holy in this world. No category is needed other than human. I realize these 2 ladies, very pleasant women who I have since become friends with and who most likely never ever hear this story, had been used to show me I needed to grow in my understanding of my actual value. This new time of my life, a time with no fallback on the noble enterprise of busily parenting my flock, is a chance to just be. What does that look like? Well, that is a daily adventure, isn't it? When I meet someone new, I do know that I ask them what their passions are and what brought them to my neck of the woods. Heck, I even asked them to share their faith journeys with me. But I never ask, so what do you do?
Lots of ways to explore outer space. But there's an inner world as well. So let's explore beyond light and sound and time and space. Join us as we listen in to an experienced Innernaut. Get introduced to a new language to describe uncharted, inverted space. We enter through the portal of dreams.
Well, last night in my meditation, I went to a place that when I came out of it, I couldn't do a very good job describing it because everything was so pulled together there that essentially you just saw how it all intertwined. It was just all intertwined. And so the best I could do in terms of trying to describe something like that, in terms of my meditation, was that decisions that affect the individual also affect the whole. Well, yeah, okay. I mean, we all kind of know that, but in the way I saw it, if I could have said it the way I saw it, to me, it made complete sense. In other words, I could have carried the energy across, and then if an action is done to cut off the rights of, say, the general public, because I'm part of the general public, I am automatically affected. But again, yes, people kind of have a sense of that, but how so, you know? How do you do that? How is it like that? Because the mind senses are in there, and they all have us thinking that we function in some sort of capacity that has our own singularity. So anyway, this whole thing was the sequence of dealing with stuff that's bifurcated, busted into all of these pieces from the essence. The theme, of course, is it's the recognition that I am the essence. I'm not the storyline. I'm not all of these pieces, and that the storyline has to come back and reestablish itself in the essence. In other words, not just sit out there as a storyline as if that's what is real. Now the problem that exists is I'm busted into all kinds of pieces, so I'm wandering this way and I'm wandering that way. It's one of the things that keeps it difficult for me to carry on a conversation with somebody very long, because I'm constantly wanting to switch subjects, because the energetic flickerings are constantly bombarding me. I don't, in that regard, ground very well. Well, anyway, I have all kinds of sleep dreams that kind of portray how this is. So in my first dream, I find myself agreeing to provide money to resolve a situation. In other words, it's a conundrum that goes around and around. But the influence from the meditation dream is that everything is me. So in doing so, I make a promise so something can happen. But I'm hesitant to do so. And then when revisiting the situation, sanity. The reason is because I'm doing everything. In other words, I'm not only making the promise, but to enable it to happen, I have to then have my credit card debt pay for it. The whole schematic. I'm doing everything. If I didn't, nothing would happen. Actually, nothing does happen, because we are all the overallness. There aren't these deviations, but in the dream, to show how absurd one has gotten, as I'm pausing to evaluate what is taking place, I am reminded that because I'm president of the company and in a position to do such and so, that I must do this as a responsibility. Kind of a mantra of deceit that we do to ourselves. Okay, well, I kind of know that there is something so much more, but I'm going to go along with it. But it doesn't mean that I also have to believe it. So I say, yada, 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 I've heard enough. In other words, I don't need to keep being reminded what isn't real. And the meaning of this is in time and space. A pressure is put on the heart to function in various set ways to follow the norms of time and space. Deep down, I know it's not real. Nevertheless, all around me, this is what I'm compelled to experience. The defiling of the heart leads to a kind of despair and exhaustion even. Frustration. Yet one bears the heat and burden of the day contending with this deviation because one's trapped in the veil, and to the degree that you get it, you can't hardly stand the false pretenses that are all around, and all of this is kind of pounded into your synapses as if real. And the time comes when you've had it because you know the difference. In other words, the overallness of the heart is in relationship with the essence behind all that is, which means that if you're in a relationship with the heart, you are in relationship with the essence, because the essence and the heart work hand in hand. The heart is in the overallness, and the essence permeates through. It is the overallness. I shouldn't even say permeating it. It is the overallness. And so then in my next dream, I work out a situation in a particular scenario, and in the very same time interval, because I'm busted up into various pieces, I'm presented with another situation on something that's entirely different. And the two situations require separate attention and a different appreciation because there's different schematics. Well, you can't have too much on your plate. You can be all over the place. So that's what this is showing. I get a call back and I find myself talking to the person actually about this other scenario as if the two are correlated. And this creates confusion. Suddenly I realize things don't sound right. And I ask the person to refresh my mind and memory regarding what we were talking about and a circumstance that exists there. And so what does that signify? That the heart sweeps through all that is with an invisible essence at its core. However, over the course of time, we've gotten deviated from the essence and into the abstractions from the whole. We've also gotten deviated in terms of the oneness behind the essence. That oneness keeps us in sync with the underlying overallness. So in this dream, I've gotten skewered. And as a result, I'm unable to intertwine connectively. So what is going on? Because I'm so deviated from the whole, I can't sort anything out. When you get really deviated from the whole, you get into a bewilderment. It's more than amnesia. It's a type of strange bewilderment. You're beside yourself, because you're trying to coast in the amnesia then, which is an irresponsible atmosphere that you take on. The heart doesn't really appropriately agree, but your mind senses will override it. And when I mean heart, I mean the underlying quality that goes through all things, that knows all things, that is, for lack of a better word, an aspect that triculates as essence, even though we can't put our finger on it. And then a deeper meaning for all of the dreams last night is I'm bouncing about from this to that. And in doing so, because the mind senses are involved, there's energetic levels. So you're skewered all over the place because of an ungroundedness that's scattering into pieces and veils the essence and thus the clarity, the naturalness. In other words, you can't function meaningfully when you're like this. You're just yo-yoing. And so you just function in accordance to energetic deviations as if that's what's real. In other words, the deviations from the essence that are just the current bifurcated storyline. To be estranged like this from the essence into a storyline invokes the mind senses for rationalization purposes, because you're in time and space when the mind senses come jumping right in. Outside of time and space, you are going to hold on to something that is the essence instead of the mind senses. And what the mind can perceive from this collapsed state, when the heart is being subjected to bewilderment, is a low thing.
Next time on Nameless, we speak to contemplative teacher, painter, and author Wendy Tremaine. The topic, retreating to the known self. For further exploration of the ego, I highly recommend you check out Aaron Abke, ABKE, on YouTube.
In our prep work for the Nameless show, we have come across some provocative quotes. We have culled 365 of these from our work with quantum mechanics, mysticism, and alchemy to post on our Twitter feed, Daily Dervish. Dervishes are infamous for saying or doing something disruptive to the collective amnesia. Get your daily disruption on twitter.com by subscribing to Daily Dervish.
Special thanks to Linda Wooster for letting us use her song, Apology. Linda's music can be found at lindawooster.com. WORSTER. If you have enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tap the subscribe button on your favorite platform to follow us for new episodes every other week. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. For a transcript in Spanish, English, Hindi, or other languages, please go to thenamelessshow.com and email your questions to thenamelessshow@gmail.com. Time is precious in this dimension. Thank you for spending some of yours with us. None of this would be possible without our dedicated team of lightworkers. Cheryl Ray, Carol B., David Clare, Yoselin Riojas, and Rain Jubilee. Voiceover acting talent for Listening In segment by Yasna Brown, Teresa Langston, or John Bellimer. The theme sound for Nameless was created by Rob Carey at Cosmic Turtle Sound Studios, Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Additional sound beds created by Paul Lee, Rob Carey, Rory Morella, AJ Pantaleo, and Dan Gallagher. The Nameless Show, copyright 2021 under Sophia Unity Foundation. Wisdom is one.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did it again, it's my fault. Do you think we could still be friends? Oh, I never said I was perfect, so why you getting mad at me? I'm just as much of a loser as anybody else, but I'm really not trying to be. So just listen for a minute to what I've got to say, and you'll maybe get a different slant. 'Cause when I get obnoxious, you can walk away from me, but I can't, and I'm sorry.